December 12th, 1976. The International Hotel, Las Vegas. Elvis Presley stood backstage, his hands trembling as he reached for another pill. At 41 years old, the king was drowning. His marriage to Priscilla had crumbled. His health was deteriorating. The man who'd once moved millions with a single hip shake now needed help getting into his jewel-encrusted jumpsuit. His manager, Colonel Parker, had him locked into brutal performance schedules, 2 shows a night, 7 days a week. Elvis was a prisoner of his own fame, performing on autopilot while dying inside. But in exactly 17 minutes, a woman in the 3rd row would say 7 words that would crack open the armor he'd built around his heart. Those words would echo through the final months of his life, reminding him of who he'd been before the world made him into something else. This is the story of that night, the night Elvis Presley remembered he was human. The dressing room mirror reflected a stranger. Elvis stared at the puffy face looking back at him, barely recognizing the young truck driver from Memphis who'd walked into Sun Studio 22 years ago with nothing but a guitar and a dream. "5 minutes, Mr. Presley," the stage manager called through the door. Elvis swallowed hard, washing down another pill with lukewarm water. The doctors called them medication. He called them survival. Without them, he couldn't perform. Without them, he couldn't sleep. Without them, he couldn't face another day of being Elvis Presley, a character he'd been playing so long he'd forgotten where the performance ended and the real man began. His father, Vernon, knocked and entered without waiting. "You all right, son?" "I'm fine, Daddy." The lie came easily now. "You don't look fine. Maybe we should cancel tonight." "And lose another $100,000? Have Colonel breathing down my neck?" Elvis forced a smile. "I said I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. His daughter, Lisa Marie, was growing up without him. His friends, the Memphis Mafia, had become paid employees who laughed at his jokes because they were on the payroll. And Priscilla... God, Priscilla had finally had enough. The divorce papers sat in his Graceland office, waiting for his signature. The stage manager appeared again. "Mr. Presley, they're ready for you." Elvis stood, his knees aching, his back screaming from the karate moves he still forced his aging body to perform. The white jumpsuit with the American Eagle stretched across his expanding waistline felt like a costume for a role he no longer wanted to play. As he walked through the corridor toward the stage, he could hear the crowd roaring his name. 2,000 people who had paid good money to see the king. They wanted the myth, the legend, the untouchable Elvis Presley. They had no idea the man inside was barely holding on. The lights hit him like a physical force. The band launched into CC Rider. Elvis grabbed the microphone and delivered the opening lines, his voice still powerful despite everything else falling apart. For the first 3 songs, he went through the motions. Smile, thrust, spin, toss a scarf to a screaming woman in the front row. He'd done this so many times he could perform in his sleep, and sometimes, numbed by pills, he practically did. Then came Hurt. It was a song about loss, about loneliness, about being misunderstood by the world. Every time Elvis sang it, he felt like he was confessing his sins to strangers who couldn't hear what he was really saying. "I'm so hurt. To think that you lied to me." That's when he saw her. She sat perfectly still while everyone around her swayed and screamed. Elvis's eyes locked onto her face, and the microphone nearly slipped from his hand. It was impossible. It had to be impossible. The woman looked exactly like his mother, Gladys, who'd been dead for 18 years. Same dark hair, though streaked with gray now, in the way Gladys's might have been if she'd lived. Same soft, round face. Same eyes that seemed to see straight through every wall he'd ever built. Elvis's voice cracked. He tried to recover, to keep singing, but the words wouldn't come. The band continued playing, confused, glancing at each other as Elvis stood frozen center stage, staring at a woman in the third row. The audience began to murmur. This wasn't part of the show. Charlie Hodge, his guitarist, stepped closer. "Elvis? Boss, you okay?" But Elvis didn't hear him. All he could see was that face. The face that had been there for every childhood struggle, every teenage dream, every early success before fame had turned into a gilded cage. His mother had been his anchor, his compass, his everything. When she died in 1958, something in Elvis had died too. He'd never really grieved, never let himself feel the full weight of that loss. Instead, he'd buried it under performances, under movies, under pills, and women, and anything else that could numb the pain. Now, staring at this woman, all of it came rushing back. Tears began streaming down Elvis's face. The tough guy image, the swagger, the king persona, it all melted away. In front of 2,000 people, Elvis Presley broke down and cried. The audience fell silent. Some thought it was part of an emotional performance. Others sensed something real was happening, something they weren't meant to witness. Joe Esposito, his road manager, rushed from the wings. "Elvis, man, what's happening?" Elvis held up a shaking hand. "That woman. Third row, left side. Do you see her?" Joe squinted into the audience. "The older lady in the floral dress? She looks just like—" Elvis couldn't finish the sentence. Security guards began moving toward the woman, thinking she might be a threat. But Elvis stopped them with a gesture that seemed to take all his remaining strength. "No," he said into the microphone, his voice raw. "No, let her. I need to. Please." The woman stood up slowly, gracefully. She wasn't rushing, wasn't making a scene. She simply walked toward the stage as if she'd been expected all along. People near her would later report something strange. They couldn't quite remember her arriving. The seat she'd been sitting in had been empty moments before. They were almost certain. But there she was, as real as anyone. Elvis knelt down at the edge of the stage, bringing himself to her eye level. His hands were shaking. His whole body was shaking. "Ma'am," he whispered, though the microphone caught it, "I'm sorry, but you remind me of someone." The woman reached up and gently took his hand. Her touch was warm, solid, real. "I know, baby," she said softly. "That's why I'm here." The woman's grip on Elvis's hand was firm but gentle, exactly like he remembered from childhood, when his mother would hold his hand crossing the street in Tupelo, when times were hard, and love was the only thing they had in abundance. "What's your name?" Elvis asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That doesn't matter right now," she replied. "What matters is that you listen to me. Can you do that?" Elvis nodded, tears still streaming down his face. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew this was insane. Stopping a show, kneeling on stage, holding hands with a stranger while thousands watched. But something deeper, something he'd ignored for too long, told him this moment was more important than any performance. The woman glanced around at the silent watching crowd, then back to Elvis. Her eyes, so much like Gladys's eyes, held a mixture of love and concern that cut straight through him. "She's with you, you know," the woman said. "Your mama. She never left." Elvis's breath caught. I miss her every day." "I know you do, baby. And she knows. She sees everything, the good and the hard. Especially the hard." The woman squeezed his hand tighter. "She sees what you're doing to yourself." Elvis flinched. Even through the haze of pills and denial, he knew exactly what she meant. "She's proud of you," the woman continued. "Proud of the music, proud of how you broke down barriers, proud of the joy you brought to millions. But Elvis—" She leaned in closer, and what she said next would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. "She wants you to come home." "I don't understand," Elvis said, his voice breaking. She's gone." "Not heaven, baby. Not yet." The woman's eyes held his with an intensity that felt supernatural. "Home to yourself. Home to the boy she raised. The boy who sang gospel in church, who treated people with respect, who knew that fame was a gift, not a prison." Elvis pulled back slightly, defensive mechanisms kicking in. "I am that person. I haven't changed." "Haven't you?" The woman's voice wasn't accusatory, just sad. "When's the last time you sang for the joy of it instead of the paycheck? When's the last time you looked in the mirror and saw Elvis Aaron Presley instead of Elvis Presley? When's the last time you let yourself feel something real instead of numbing it away?" The words hit harder than any punch. Elvis's shoulders began to shake with sobs. "She didn't raise you to fade away like this," the woman said, her voice fierce now. "She didn't sacrifice everything so you could slowly kill yourself on stage. Your mama wants her boy back. The real one, not this shadow." "I don't know if I can," Elvis admitted, the most honest words he'd spoken in years. "I don't know if that boy still exists." The woman smiled then, and it was so achingly familiar that Elvis felt his heart might break. "He does. He's right there crying real tears for the first time in years. He's the one who stopped the show because something real finally broke through. That's the Elvis she wants to come home." She released his hand and stepped back. "You can't do it all at once, but you can start. Tonight, right now. You can remember who you were before all this, and you can choose to find your way back." Elvis wanted to ask her more, how she knew these things, who she really was, whether his mother had truly sent her. But before he could speak, someone in the audience called out, "We love you, Elvis." Others joined in. "We're here for you. You're still the king. We see you." The woman gestured to the crowd. "They don't need the costume, baby. They need the truth. Give them that, and you might just save yourself in the process." Then she turned and walked back toward her seat, moving through the crowd with that same unhurried grace. Elvis stood slowly, his legs unsteady, his face wet with tears. He looked at the band, then at the audience, then at his own trembling hands. For a long moment, nobody knew what would happen next. Would he walk off? Collapse? Try to continue the scripted show as if nothing had happened? Instead, he did something he hadn't done in over a decade. "Charlie," he said to his guitarist, "put down the electric. Joe, get me an acoustic." The band members exchanged confused glances. This wasn't in the playbook. Colonel Parker was probably having a heart attack in the wings. Joe Esposito quickly brought an acoustic guitar on stage. Elvis took it, feeling the familiar weight in his hands. He hadn't played guitar during a show in years. The king didn't need to play his own instrument, the thinking went. The king just performed. But right now, Elvis wasn't the king. He was just a man trying to find his way back to something real. "I'm going to do something different tonight," he told the audience, his voice still rough with emotion. "If that's all right with y'all." The crowd erupted in supportive applause. They didn't understand what they'd just witnessed, but they could feel the shift in the air. Something authentic was happening. Elvis strummed the guitar, adjusting the tuning. His fingers felt clumsy at first, out of practice, but muscle memory kicked in, and suddenly he was back in Tupelo, back on the porch with his mother, back when music was about feeling instead of business. "My mama loved gospel music," he said simply. "She used to sing it while she cooked, while she cleaned, while she worried about keeping food on the table. She had the most beautiful voice, and she taught me that music wasn't about showing off. It was about touching something true inside people." He began playing "Where No One Stands Alone," a gospel song his mother had sung to him countless times. His voice, when it came, was different from the polished performance voice he'd been using. It was rawer, more vulnerable, filled with genuine emotion instead of practiced showmanship. The audience listened in stunned silence. This wasn't the Elvis they'd paid to see, but somehow it was more. It was real. As he sang, Elvis felt something loosening in his chest, some knot of pain and pretense that had been tightening for years. He wasn't thinking about hitting the right notes or executing the right moves. He was just singing, letting the words carry his grief, his longing, his desperate hope that maybe, somehow, it wasn't too late to change. When he finished, the silence lasted 3 full seconds before the applause began. It wasn't the screaming hysteria of a typical Elvis show. It was something deeper, more respectful. They were applauding the man, not the myth. Elvis set down the guitar and picked up the microphone again. "I'm going to sing you one more song," he said, "and I'm going to sing it the way I should have been singing all along, with everything I got, holding nothing back." He nodded to the band, and they began "In the Ghetto," a song about poverty, about children growing up in circumstances Elvis knew intimately from his own childhood. But tonight, he didn't just perform it. He lived it, channeling every memory of growing up poor in Mississippi, of his mother's struggles, of the pain that success could never quite erase. His voice cracked in places. His runs weren't perfect. But it was the most honest performance he'd given in years, maybe ever. When it ended, Elvis looked out at the audience, really looked at them, maybe for the first time in years. They weren't just faces in the dark, sources of adoration and income. They were people, each carrying their own pain, their own struggles, their own hopes that maybe a song could make things a little better. "Thank you," he said simply, "for tonight, for your patience, for seeing me, really seeing me." He meant to say more, but emotion choked off the words. Instead, he just nodded, handed the microphone to Charlie, and walked off stage. Backstage, Colonel Parker was apoplectic. "What the hell was that? You stopped the show. You cried. You played guitar. This is not what people pay for." But for once, Elvis didn't care what the Colonel thought. He went straight to his dressing room and locked the door. Joe knocked a few minutes later. "Elvis? Boss, you okay in there?" "Get me the woman," Elvis said through the door. "The one from the third row. I need to talk to her." Joe and the security team searched everywhere. They checked the seat she'd been in. Empty. No personal items left behind. They reviewed the ticket sales for that section. No purchase record matched her description. They questioned people who'd been sitting near her. That's when things got strange. Multiple witnesses swore the seat had been empty until the middle of Hurt. They remembered Elvis looking at that spot, remembered seeing someone there afterward, but couldn't quite recall the woman arriving or leaving. The details of her face. Elvis Presley didn't transform overnight. The road to change never works that way. But something fundamental shifted in him that December night in 1976. He started trying, really trying, to reconnect with the person he'd been before fame consumed him. He reduced his pill intake, though he never quit entirely. He spent more time with Lisa Marie. He went back to Graceland and sang gospel songs in the living room with his father and grandmother. No audience, no performance, just family and faith. He died 8 months later, in August 1977. But those who were closest to him in those final months said they saw glimpses of the old Elvis, the real Elvis, breaking through more and more. The woman was never identified. Supernatural encounter, elaborate hoax, or desperate hallucination brought on by medication and grief. Everyone has their theory. But here's what matters. In that moment, Elvis remembered who he was. And for a man who'd lost himself completely in the character the world demanded he play, that moment of recognition was everything. What do you think happened that night? Have you ever had an encounter that changed your life? Share your story in the comments below. And if you've ever felt lost in who you're supposed to be versus who you really are, know this: it's never too late to come home to yourself.